Okay, hey, welcome then to today's Thursday's discussion of an introduction to cells. So we'll get to the notes in a second. We just got a short question guide that goes with this. It's only 5 questions long, so check your fillable question guides for our intro to cells. Um, so we'll just kind of jump into it in a second. Starts in 1665 with the invention of the microscope. That's when people started realizing things like cells existed. We know cells are a basic unit of life, one of our 8 characteristics of life we learned earlier this year. So let's talk about some of those characteristics of cells, and we'll talk about what makes up cells, cell types. We'll talk about a bunch of the function of some of those parts of cells. So that's what we're getting into, cell stuff. Okay, cell theory. So let's talk about the 3 things cell theory discusses. All right. So number one, here's our first part. Number one, first thing is all cells are composed of cells. Nope. Cut. Action. All living things are composed of cells, is what he meant to say. Okay. Also, cells are the basic unit of structure and function. Also, how do you get more cells? From existing cells. You can't make cells out of nothing. So cells come from pre-existing cells. And those are our 3 aspects of cell theory. So we'll define prokaryotes and eukaryotes here in a minute, which you got a little bit of last week, so I'm going to kind of rehash that. Number 2 says, what characteristics do all cells possess? Well, they're all surrounded by something, right? They all have a membrane surrounding them. One of the topics we'll get into later is how does stuff move across that membrane. Okay, so that's later, next week. And also, all cells have some sort of genetic material, have DNA in them. Again, having DNA is one of those characteristics of life. So they have DNA, at least at some point of a cell's life. Sometimes they modify later on, but at least initially, they got DNA, and they're surrounded by a nucleus, and therefore we have a cell. So what the heck is a nucleus is the next thing, right? And so all the types of cells that exist on Earth either have or don't have a nucleus. All right, so it's super dependent on whether or not we got a nucleus. So what's a nucleus? Well, it's that little membrane-bound container in the middle of a cell that has the DNA inside it, the genetic material. So it's contained by a membrane. So we say membrane-bound or membrane-enclosed. I use the membrane-bound as in bound by, contained by a membrane. So there you go. There's our nucleus. Number 3 is what we're on, and it contains DNA. Yep. Okay, so we got 2 types of cells, 2 major categories of cells. The first one is eukaryotes. Simply said, they have nuclei. And prokaryotes, they do not. There's more to it than that, which we'll get into here in number 5. But it's based on whether or not they have a nucleus. So this is, again, something we mentioned last week. Here I am saying it from my mouth to yours. Okay, so nucleus. So eukaryote, prokaryote. Karyo is from a Latin word that means kernel. So when people looked in a microscope early in the 17th century, they're like, what's that little kernel in the middle of those circles? And they're like, let's call the nucleus I will now embed a video. Yes, next.
Where's your rope, Ignacio?
It was stinky, but these are my recreation clothes.
They look expensive.
Thank you. I mean, yes, they may have the appearance of riches, but beneath the clothes, we find a man. And beneath the man, we find his nucleus.
Nucleus?
Okay, so for number 5 here, we'll talk about the different characteristics that each cell type has. So prokaryotes, So they have DNA, they have they have genetic material. It's not in a nucleus. It's in an area called the nucleoid region, but it's not in a nucleus. All right. Also, prokaryotes. They don't have these membrane-bound organelles. They have some organelles, but they're very simple and small, right? Which leads to the third thing. So these are all our three major characteristics of prokaryotes. They're very little. You know the example, our classic example of a prokaryote? You should probably jot this down too. Bacteria. Okay. Excellent. Okay, to wrap up number 5, let's compare our prokaryote stuff with eukaryote stuff. So we got 3 things to mention about eukaryotes. The first thing is that they got a nucleus. All right, so their DNA is contained and all packaged up in a nucleus, so it's separate from the rest of the cell. And they're big, much larger and more complexer than prokaryotic cells. And they got lots and lots and lots of these little membrane-bound organelles contained everywhere inside. Okay? All right, so lots of little structures on the inside, okay? Lots of specialization. There you go. Classic examples. Any kind of plant, animal, fungus that you can think of. You know all kinds of types of protists. You say kelp. You say, oh, yeah, I know about seaweed, and I know about paramecium. Those are examples. So take out 2 to learn more.